Yeah, so let me kind of switch tacks just a little bit. I got just a couple more questions for you, Bruce. Well, there was a quote that I want to read to you, or an idea from your writings that resonated with me. But you have said that you don't pre-visualize locations. You don't go out with an idea of what you want to shoot. What I wrote down was a quote from you: "Is photography is a lesson in submission,
Hmm.
learning to live with what is given to us, not what we want." And
Yes.
that ability to let go, that submission part, really sort of was like, wow, yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Well, if you get the email from somebody who says to you, I went to the location that I love this picture of yours, and I went to this location and I was so looking forward to having a fantastic sunrise. And when I got up the next morning, it didn't happen, and I was so disappointed. And I'm thinking, well, the landscape has no knowledge of you, it doesn't know what you want. And this idea that you're going to get given what you want all the time isn't going to happen. So I think photography is almost a lesson in life, isn't it? Really about dealing with what you're given, and that doesn't mean that I'm beyond it all, or I don't suffer from that. Of course I do. I still get those despondent days like anybody else does. That you go out and you just know that nothing's clicking for you, nothing's happening. But I know more often than not, when I think it's not clicking, it's usually not the landscape that's not clicking, it's me.
Hmm.
And yeah, and it's usually, and there's been really odd things like you're just so despondent, you're thinking about giving up, and you start turning around, and then 5 minutes later you find something, and it's been the best morning ever. And you realize that it's about dealing with your own emotions and your own expectations, and sometimes you get in the way of yourself. That's ultimately it, really. I think it's you just get in the way of yourself, and having pre-visualizations is a really bad thing. So I try and stay away from. I'm not a big social media person at all, and I think um, I would love to go somewhere and just see it the way that I would see it, rather than just walking up there and if I come home and I've managed to just take the trope picture that everybody else does when they go there, then at least I know, well, it came from an honest place. I wasn't
Hmm.
really being deliberately influenced by anybody else. I just saw it the way that I saw it, and that's what I saw. But more often than not, I think that if you haven't seen it, what everybody else is doing, then you've probably got more chance of actually sort of finding your own individuality there. Um, but yeah, I think that it's just like you've just got to learn to let go. I think with everything, it's
Yeah.
sometimes the creativity is flowing, and other times it isn't. And yeah, and I can actually tell you a wee story about this. I'm sure you've experienced this as well. So one of my very first workshops was in a really famous place in Scotland called Glencoe, and there's a really famous tree there, and everybody had seen pictures of this tree, and we went there the morning, and it's in a sort of dip in the ground, and it was full of fog, and nobody could see anything. They couldn't see the tree, and one of my participants, Kieran, was really in his element. He was making pictures of all the reflections and the stones, and it looked a bit like a John Paul Caponegro shot to me, the one that he was doing. And I talked to him about it, and he said, "Yeah," he said, "I spent time with John Paul." He said, "He's a fascinating guy to listen to." And we got back to the hotel, and everybody was just talking about how they were very disappointed. They'd already pre-visualized what they wanted to get. They wanted to get the tree and the sun hitting the mountain in the background and all that sort of stuff. And we shoved this picture up, and everybody said, "Where was that?" And we said, "It was
Hmm.
there this morning. It's on the location." "Oh, I never saw that." And I said, "Well, that's the beauty about it. That's what I always love about workshops anyway, is that, everybody, it's all been in the same place, but more often than not, you see different takes on the same place from everybody.
Right.
And it's just a lesson always that there usually is something there, but you're just not seeing it.
Yeah. Well, I think I've often said that pre-visualization stifles creativity because it just immediately blocks and channels your vision that this is what I want to
Yeah.
get, this is what I want to see, and you don't see everything else around you.
Yeah. Well, I remember I've listened to so many interviews with Michael Kenna about and Ray Metzger adapted to Creative Constipation,
Hmm.
and I've always liked that. It just stuck with me, and so I suppose as a workshop leader, you do borrow from things around you, but you borrow them because when you read them, you realize that that's exactly what you think too, but you just couldn't find a better way of putting it. And I think there is like if you've got to be able to be laterally thinking about it's not what we're getting given today, what are we getting given instead? And I sometimes take people out in the most foul weather, and they're all saying to me, nobody says anything to you in the car, and there's sometimes the car's deathly quiet, and you just know that everybody's thinking,
Right.
why are we doing this? And then sometimes when you get back, they kind of go, God, that was actually quite a good morning. We got some stuff, and if you don't go, you don't get.
Right. Right.
That thing too. And but even if you don't get, that's okay too.
You had a good day.
You had a good day, and it's just you were out, and um, it's not about acquisition. I don't think it's about acquisition. I think people get focused on that sometimes, and it's not all about that really. It's there's
It's
something fulfilling about.
experiential.
Yeah, it's experience. Yeah, it is really, and yeah, some sort of depth to your life. It's better than sitting in an IT office staring at a computer monitor. And
Hmm.
I
when I
get asked all the time now, what do I think of all this AI coming in? And I said, well, it's gonna be there and people are gonna do what they're gonna do. But AI cannot take away the experience.
no, that's right. I think that
So
hopefully you'll get a percentage of people that will just use the AI because they just want to win competitions and stuff like that. And but I don't think most people, certainly everybody that I meet in my workshops, I think most of them are there because they want to live it.
I agree.
And I
Hmm.
think that's what most people are there for. They want some way to disengage from their normal life in some way, and it's a form of meditation as well. Photography, anyway. I don't. I seem to become invisible to myself when I'm taking pictures. I'm not thinking about anything really. Um, some of my friends would say that I don't think about anything most of the time anyway, but that's another.
One last question. So you live in Edinburgh,
Mhm.
and like everywhere, there's things to do where we all live. We all go to, these places, but there's things to do within a short drive of where you live if you look
Mhm.
around. Um, how often do you get out? I know you're processing now for a few days.
I know where you're coming from about that question. It's like, do you really need to travel to photograph something out in your back door? And I definitely think there's something true. There's something. Int- I think what more often what we're doing when we do this thing about it's not because we think there's nothing there. It's just that you just get more inspiration from seeing something unusual. So for me, for many years living in Scotland, I was so used to all this lush green vegetation, and because it rains all the time, and it's great. It's like Seattle. It's the grey skies, endless grey skies, and we make jokes about sometimes you miss summer because it happened overnight in the middle of the week, in the middle of June or something. The sun came out at night time. And so for me, when I started traveling, I actually found deserts the most inspiring thing because they were just so unusual. So you're looking for something that's just going to pique your interest because it's away from um, your normal existence. I would say the more traveling I've done, I now understand the value of my own country. Now I actually see how unique it is and how beautiful it is. But interestingly, I actually had to do a bit of traveling to be able
You realize that,
to
yeah.
realize
Find
that
out.
really.
Yeah,
And so I do think that I still think that there's perfect validity that some point I'm hoping some point we're going to see that somebody won a photography competition from shooting a salvage yard or a land refill, a refuse land dump or something, because I think good photographs are available everywhere. And similarly to that adage that when people are always saying things like you get the email from somebody that says, I just want to make sure I've got the right lenses for the trip, Bruce, because I don't want to miss anything. And I'm just thinking, rule number one in photography is to completely submit to the fact that we're missing things all the time.
Mm.
And this idea that suddenly something amazing happened, no, something amazing is happening all the time, and it's something that's happening right behind us, and it's just about whether we see it or not. So I'm pretty sure that I could go out there and photograph. I mean, Edinburgh's a very beautiful town. If I was going to do it, my get out clause, I suppose, for saying that I don't do this is because usually when I'm at home, my sister Laura says to me that I come home for a holiday.
Yeah.
And there's a that's that thing, isn't it, about the commerce and art, about doing this for a living. And the when you're running workshops, they're pretty full on. They're quite consuming, and they're really great fun and everything when you've got a really great group and everything. But usually when I'm coming home, the last thing I'm thinking about is going out with the camera. You kind of need time. Everybody needs time away from, no matter how passionate you are from something, you need time away from it.
Correct.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hmm.
Correct. Well, let's we've taken up a lot of time. One thing we didn't talk about that I know we wanted to briefly, and could we just, Bruce, talk like we were talking prior to the record button being hit about seeing, and how we were talking about how we tell our folks when they're driving around to look for opportunities. And even though you may not have a camera with you, it's a good habit to get into.
Well, it's
Oh,
kind of
right,
it's
yes.
a mindset to develop to see all the time and see
Yes, I
light and
think so.
tonality.
Yeah, so what we were saying before we hit the record button was that I think John had mentioned that when people turn up in the workshops, usually it takes people about a day or two to get into the zone. And it's something that I hear a lot too, is people telling me it took me a day or two to get into it. And I would start asking people, why do you think that is? And they couldn't put their finger down on it. And I would say, well, I know in my own case that I've always been visually creative. When I was a little kid, I was drawing and painting and winning art competitions and all this sort of stuff, and being given oil paints and stuff. So I think my view on it is that I think I've just innately see things all the time, and I can't really switch it off. It's just part of me that even when I'm not taking pictures and I'm just going on my daily stuff, going anywhere, I always see patterns
Hmm.
and things that match or symmetry in everywhere that I am. And I think for some people, they've maybe just had that knocked out of them. And so usually when folk come in workshops with me, I have a theory that cameras are almost like an invitation to start looking. And then the moment that we put the camera down, we stop looking. And if somebody's able to point that out to you and say, well, do you realize that as soon as you put your camera away, you've just gone back to not really thinking about looking at tonalities and stuff. And so then I was mentioning to you that I remember reading this lovely article in photo.net many years ago about a street photographer who said that even when he doesn't have his camera and he's walking down the street, he tries to anticipate when he sees the shopkeeper coming out the door and the dog walking past. He tries to anticipate this time that he would click the shutter. And I think that's really good practice just to get into that. Even though just because you don't have the camera, it doesn't mean that you can't enjoy stop and stare at the clouds and on
Oh
the way home
yeah.
from work. From the way home from work, maybe I'm just going to go by the beach and just stop and look out at the sea and watch the clouds and things like that. It's very interesting about awareness and color awareness, and there's a lot of things that happen innately in the visual system. I've read up quite a bit about this, but color casts are very interesting. I've found you can be with a group in the morning, and everybody wants to point their camera towards where the sun is, and I'm thinking you've got one light source in the sky, so the whole landscape is bathed in red. So I'd much rather point my camera towards softer tones. So I'm usually 180 degrees. I've usually got the sun behind me. And but if you're standing there bathed in red light, everybody's telling you, well, the sun bit looks really interesting, and they think there's no color anywhere else. And I've actually found if you actually say to people, what color are the clouds? Um, Usually in a group of six people, you'll get about half the group will tell you they're magenta, and the other half of them will tell you that they're grey. And then you'll say to them, but if you actually look at them, they've actually got a little bit of a pink cast to them. And usually everybody will say to me, oh yeah, and it's really interesting. And so I think we've got like a color memory. We make certain assumptions that clouds are grey or they're white or
We do.
whatever.
We do.
And I think after a while is that the beauty about photography is it gives us this luxury of just being able to stop and look at things and for much longer than we normally would. The human visual system is basically designed to filter everything out. All it's trying to do for you is make sure that you don't stumble over anything when you walk into a room. So when you walk into a room, you don't pay attention to the wallpaper, or you just want to know how big the room is and if there are any obstacles in between you and the television set or wherever you're trying to go. And so I would say that you could take people into any room, take them back out, and then say to them, what color was the wallpaper? And most people probably wouldn't be able to tell you.
Right.
And so I think that your visual system's just filtering everything out that it doesn't need. And photography is one of these rare things where we're actually trying to unfilter everything
Hmm.
out. We're trying to learn to enhance our awareness.
Yeah.
Because, because at the beginning, if you think about when we're taking pictures, I remember coming home with one of my first pictures I took on a beach. There was a big milk carton in the middle of the frame that I could see on the negative when I got home, but I didn't see it when I was there. You
Yeah,
know,
I will just kind of add on to that, Bruce, a little bit. I'm to the point where I just walk around seeing patterns, shapes, textures, and colors. And besides helping photographically, I think it makes our lives richer because it
yeah,
makes us more present in our environment. Our heads aren't stuck in our phone screens, and it makes my existence just a richer experience, being more
yeah,
aware of where I'm at.
yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly what it's all about. That's the same reason why people, I think, get into very, very good hi-fi as well. Is that
Uh-oh.
maybe sometimes too much because they start analyzing the audio quality rather than enjoying the music. But they're basically looking for an extra level of depth to the existence of whatever you're doing. And I suppose this is going to reach something that maybe I shouldn't say, but I actually have a theory that most of us photographers we're all slightly nutty.
Mm,
We're we're kind of people that we're just a bit obsessive about something that most people in everyday existence just it's just a cloud and it's just a car
right,
or
right.
it's just the color red. And
Yeah, I've said that, and I always, when I'm around people who are not photographers or whatever, I said, I'm not trying to sound like an elitist here, but we tend to see things that most people just drive by
and they seem to care a lot for us.
in a
Like
different way.
when I'm editing somebody else's picture, sometimes I get micromanaged by it, and you realize that like for some people, luminosity is an important thing in their life. These things really matter, and I suppose you've got. I'm no wordsmith. I read books, but I don't think I've got a sense of. I don't think I've got the same sense of depth out of poetry that other people. Some people talk about language as if like they're eating a very tasty meal or something, and I think that
Yeah,
I'm probably tone deaf when it comes to reading text. But when I look at pictures and luminosities and tones, I get something out of that maybe some person who's more into words wouldn't
Right.
get. So we've all got our own things that we get really focused on, and I think most photographers tend to be. We've probably got a particular interest and an attention to the detail, and whether that means that we're slightly on the scale in some way or, no, or another.
everybody's
And
on the scale. It's just what
I
part of the
I
scale we're on.
I think so too.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to be a bit polite about it, but
yeah,
I
no,
think
no,
that's.
yeah, we're everybody's a bit nutty in their own way, but
Yeah, I think so.
But
I
just
think
kind of
That's
that's
adding to Jack's part, to sit with a group of maybe non-photographers and to point out something to them, not in the way of rubbing their faces that they didn't see it, but to help enrich their lives. It just shows me how much I see the world differently than kind of the average person. To say, you know what, look at the way these rocks are organized, and non-photographers will kind of think I'm nutty, and then they'll stop and take a look at it, and they'll appreciate these little details in our lives around us, and just it's a
well.
wonderful thing, the way this gift that we have to see differently.
Well, I would love to think that's the case. I'm not sure that. I think some people would probably just look at it and say that's a very nice picture and just carry on with what they're doing.
Yeah, yeah.
It's maybe just who. I think it's maybe if you found maybe there's somebody with latent, um, that once you start pointing out to them, they kind of go, "Oh, I really like that," and they didn't even know that they would be into it. I often find that's very interesting because I mean that's what I find really interesting about photography in general is that when you talk to most people come on your trips, there's no right or wrong about when they got into photography. You get people getting into it at the age of 70, and
right.
there's all different ages for it. And so you keep wondering about, so why now? Why did that happen now? So they must have had that sensibility maybe there always. And maybe so like we were talking about Bill Course. I think Bill's got a well he's got a heavy background in music, which a lot of
Right.
photographers do.
Right.
But he also has a serious appreciation for art as well. So I tend to find that, some people they've got a real appreciation for art, but they've never looked at photography in the way that you just described there, John. And then when you point it out to them, they kind of go, yeah, because nobody's ever told them
Yeah.
that they can actually look at photography in the same way that you can look at a Monet or a Cézanne. And I think I don't see why they could be any different. Really, it's
Yeah.
the same idea.
What's interesting, Bruce, and take it one step further, when we go down to the Southwest, where John and I'll be in April. Um, if you look at some of the pictographs and the sand paintings that were done, up to long hundreds and hundreds of years ago, you can actually see that principles of art were used innately by the Native Americans, even without even having nobody taught them how to place items in certain areas. And it's an amazing thing because
Mhm.
it's a great thing. But again, I don't want to sound like we're better than anybody else. And we just, I think, see things differently. And it's good to be able to share that
It
with
is.
folks.
Hey, so Bruce, I got one other topic I wanted to bring up for the audience. Again, before the show, we were talking a lot about a lot of different things, and one of the questions that you routinely get is kind of around your hit rate, or how many successful photographs do you make on a roll of film, and it kind of led to this statement that was made that sort of every photograph, whether good or bad, is sort of a stepping stone. Even
Mm.
your bad photographs are good if you're willing to learn from them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like usually if I would say to anybody out there that if they've got a really great shot that they're really pleased with, if they go back and look chronologically on their memory card or films or whatever medium they're using, there's usually a little journey from the car to that final picture. You don't just get to that picture just by turning up and just going click. It's a process of discovery, I think, sometimes, and fine tuning. I mean, I'm really big on tripods. Not for tripods are hopeless for finding compositions, but they're actually very good for fine tuning them. And I love taking my eye away from the frame and then coming back and realizing actually I've just realized that that rock's hitting the tip of the horizon there, so I'm just going to move the camera down a couple of inches, and then you find out that that picture is even better than the one that you had, and the picture you thought at that moment, you thought you'd really nailed it. This is probably the best shot you think you've taken all year, and then you've just found out in 5 minutes that you could actually improve it by moving the camera 2 inches south. And so usually when I come home and I start looking through the films, it's not even necessarily that the final image could actually be the best one. You might. I actually think we're hopeless at being editors while we're on location. All you can do is explore, and even when you find a composition that you think you do like and you think it's perfect, I would wager that it's still got room for further improvement. So you can try experimenting. You've got it in the bag now. So what you're going to do, rather than walk away and find something else, why don't you just stand and play around with it a bit more? Why don't you just get a little bit closer to that rock in the foreground? Why don't you try and step back a bit? Why don't you just try and move parallax and put things off at an angle? And sometimes you find that when you come home, you actually find it, well, it's actually image four that's the best one out of your eight images that you like better. Because I think you're better at being an editor and evaluating the work once you've shot it, but not while you're shooting it. And but ultimately, everything there is an experiment, and so it's such a little journey. But you can see chronologically where you've been going with it.
But I think
And
part of
so,
this too that we were talking about was having the freedom to experiment and having the confidence
yeah.
to experiment and not beat yourself up for it, but learn from those experiments.
So that's the point. I think that it's almost like you've got to have a photographer's dictionary. So you ban the word failure and success from there, and instead of success or failure, you have the word prototype or experiment.
Oh yeah,
And so like everything that you're doing is a prototype, everything is a work in progress. Because everything is always, even when you think you've finished the work, it's never truly finished, is it? You
no,
know, if you can go back to your old work 4 years later and you can see further room of where you might want to go with it. Of course, you're a different person by then. You're probably looking for different things too, but um, you've got to try and give yourself more permission to try things out. And so this idea of thinking that really great landscape photographers just go out there and they know what they're doing all the time. If they did, they would have to just stop because they're probably just falling into a certain trap of doing the same thing. I think that any creative person, no matter what level of ability, wants to be surprised. They want to surprise themselves. They want to actually find out that, wow, I never saw that one coming. It doesn't matter what level you are, whether you're, Ansel Adams or Gillian Rowell or Michael Kenna, or I think that, and if you're surprising yourself, what that means is you're stepping probably outside of your. I wouldn't say the word boundary because boundary suggests that's where your edges are, but most people usually have never gotten anywhere near the boundaries because they've never they're still sitting in too comfortable a zone.
right.
So usually when you're doing something that really surprises you, it's basically because you're sort of in new territory. And if you're in new territory, it usually means that you're going to be a bit lost. So being lost is actually a very normal thing to be in. And certainly, if I look at my own progress over the 15 years, there's progress is not linear, and I've had periods where it stagnates, and I felt like I'm just not doing anything new or interesting. And then there's also times when I've just felt like, well, I just don't know where am I going with this. And then later on, it makes sense to you that it's wrapped up into your style. But what you've done is you've given yourself the permission to actually screw up, really, which is a really good thing of just way of just finding new things. That's the only way you can do it. If you're always working in the confines that you know, then I still think you're growing anyway because one of my clients was very good at long exposure photography, but she kept trying to do all this ICM stuff. And I just said to her, I don't know why you're doing that. Well, I'm trying to shake it up a bit, she said. I feel like I just do the same thing. And I said, but you're so good at the long exposure stuff that I think if you just keep going with it, it's just going to naturally morph into something else
Mhm.
in its own way. It'll just gravitate and fluctuate and move. Whereas I think you're deliberately just putting I don't know, a spoke, what's the word, the analogy, a spanner in the spokes.
Mm-hmm.
You're deliberately trying to, which sometimes is valuable, deliberately derail yourself, put yourself in a very awkward situation, see what comes out of it. That, of course, is a very good thing to do. But in general, I think creativity tends to happen when the flow's happening,
Right.
keeping the flow happening. And the only way you can let the flow happen is by doing the things that you love doing. And if you're trying to go against yourself and challenge yourself, I think all you're doing is you're just causing deliberate frustration and harm to your natural state of being, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a time to go with listen to yourself, go with the flow, use that creative energy, but I think there's also time to I don't know about throwing a wrench in the spokes, but at least shaking things up a little bit when you feel the time is right. But doing it all the
Yes.
time, yeah, it can be very destructive.
Yeah, exactly. I
Yeah.
think that's it, really, isn't it? It's a bit like, just recently I've started doing more kind of pictures that have got buildings in them, and I never thought I'd be doing any of that. And right now, just struggling with the idea of thinking, is this really something where I want to go with it? And I'm thinking, well, for some reason, I'm doing it, so why don't I just give myself permission just to go ahead and mess around with it and see where it goes? I don't have to publish it.
Right.
Um, I think the assumption is that because somebody's a so-called, you know, um, like Guy Tal or um, we talked about Art Wolf and all these kind of well-known photographers that they're just always knowing what they're doing with it. I think it's just not true. I think everybody's just totally trying to figure out what the next step is as well.
Oh yeah.
Exactly.
And I like to
Exactly.
think about, this idea of like it being a stepping stone, whether you've got a head torch, but you can only see the next stone up ahead, and then you can't see the one beyond that until you get to the next one.
Right.
I think that's just the way you've got to look at it, and that you're just feeling it out all the time. So when you're feeling it out all the time, that's when it comes again back to this confidence of starting to listen to yourself more. And sometimes you've got to even listen to your own language about how you're asking questions, because I don't know if we covered it during this recording, but one of the questions I get asked a lot is things like, do you think this would be a good thing to photograph? And I think that person's answering their own question. What they're really saying to themselves is, I'm kind of interested in that.
You already know. Yeah.
They already know, but somehow
They want
maybe
your validation.
they want the validation. They want you to confirm to them that it's something worth spending time with.
And tying that because that was a wonderful conversation we had that we didn't capture earlier, but that inkling that there might be a photograph there, that's where a photographer having the confidence
Mhm.
to listen to their gut and listen to their instincts, and
I
then
was just going to say that word actually, instinct.
yeah, and
Yeah.
then the confidence to go out and try to take that photograph. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, that's great too, and learn from that. But at least you listen to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a workshop leader, the amount of times that you always learn something from it too. There's been times when I've had people, like if there's an interesting thing about style, that the longer you go down a route with a style, you can become a little bit of a prisoner of it. That you start to find out that certain things work, that that certain things work, and so you can almost become a little bit formulaic with it. And one of the things that I've always really admired about newbies, somebody who's never done anything with a camera before, is that they simply don't know what is supposed to work and what's not supposed to work. And the amount of times I've seen somebody in a workshop with me and I'm thinking they're setting this up and that's all wrong and that's not going to work. And I'm not saying it to them. I'm in the background and I'm watching. I'm thinking, no, that's just, and then it pops up in the back of their live screen and I kind of go, well, that's actually quite good.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
It's like watching a young child playing that doesn't know. It's just experimenting with things.
yeah, they don't know where these so-called boundaries are. So they're just
Yeah,
doing so.
there's no boundaries.
So there's a kind of interesting thing that happens there, that sometimes the more you learn, maybe the less that you're sometimes experimenting as well, because you start to fall into
Oh,
certain
right.
traps,
Yeah.
about things about that. Well, that's how you do this, and that's what I love about somebody who doesn't know where the rights and wrongs are, because they just do stuff, and you kind of watch in amazement and go, kind of like that result. It's brilliant. I
yeah.
actually think sometimes being a workshop leader, you can actually get in people's way being a workshop leader for them. That maybe the best thing would be for them not to spend time with you. That they should. And I've actually said to one or two people that I've met on trips with me, I've actually just found that they've got they seem to have their own thing going so well that
How many times do you look at an image that you were there with them, and you don't want to say it, but say, "Damn, how did he see that? I didn't see that." And
yeah.
here, we're professionals, right? We're supposed to.
Well, that's
People.
right. But I think it's my job to tell people that I don't think they need to spend time with me. That if I've seen somebody and I think they've really got something going in what they're doing, I've actually said to one or two people over the years, well, more than one or two, but that, actually, I don't think you need to go on workshops. I think you just need to spend more time doing what you're doing
I've
and
done the same. Yeah.
getting out there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, we could go another 2 hours, and hopefully we can down the road pick this up again. Um, Folks, having Bruce, what a gift. Um, John will put up all the show notes that'll have Bruce's website where you can find what he does, his workshops, his books, his mentoring. He does a lot of things. It'll all be there for you. All you gotta do is click on the click on the click on the here, and it'll take you to Bruce's world. Um, Bruce, thank you so much for your time. And
Well, thank
I
yeah. Well,
hope you're motivated to go grab that E6 chemical now and
well, yeah.
get
There's
back to
about
work.
there's 5 liters of it just down at the bottom of my staircase now, so I'm quite keen to get on with those films.
God
But
bless you.
it's been great fun talking to both of you. It's very nice meeting you.
Yeah. And we will, without a doubt, want to have you back. It'd be fun, John. Maybe we could get Bruce and Guy on at the same time. Wouldn't
That
that
would be
something?
incredible.
I'm sure Guy'd be up for it. That'd be
Yeah.
something to think. Well, anyhow, thank you all. And if anybody's got any comments, questions, suggestions, wetalkphoto@gmail.com is the place to send them. And again, thank you all. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, John. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
All right, folks. Bye
All right.
bye.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.